Imagine a family so profoundly influential, so utterly insidious, that they could subtly reshape your very essence, not through force, but through an almost imperceptible whisper on the wind. I'm Arthur Vance, and what I found hidden in the forgotten county archives of Gloomwood Hollow will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. My name is Arthur Vance, and for 20 years, I've made a living sifting through the dust and forgotten deeds of Appalachia's past. I'm a genealogist, a historical cartographer, a man who finds comfort in facts and verifiable truths. But what I stumbled upon in the deepest, most isolated corner of eastern Kentucky, in a place locals whispered was simply Gloomwood Hollow, well, that defied every rational explanation I possessed. It started innocuously enough, with an old land deed from 1847. Most land transfers in that period were straightforward, but this one for Gloomwood Hollow was odd. The property lines shifted year to year, sometimes by dozens of acres, without any new surveys or sales. And the names on the deeds, the original owners, simply vanished from all subsequent records. No deaths, no relocations, just cessation. That alone was enough to prick my professional curiosity, but it was the name of the new owner that truly caught my attention. Silas Ashwick, unlike typical mountain settlers who arrived with a traceable history, a family Bible, or at least a few worn possessions, Silas Ashwick seemed to have materialized from the very mist of the mountains. There were no records of his birth, no prior census entries, no military service, no marriage certificates before his appearance in Gloomwood. He simply was. Local folklore, which I typically dismissed, spoke of him emerging from a sealed limestone cavern known as the Whispermouth, a place tribal elders had warned against for centuries. These accounts described Silas as unnaturally tall, with fingers that were too long and eyes that reflected light like an animal's in the deep shadows. Reverend Alastair Finch, a traveling circuit preacher who attempted to establish a mission in Gloomwood in 1850, wrote in his private journal that Silas spoke a dialect of English that seemed to predate modern evolution by centuries, often pausing mid-sentence as if listening to instructions only he could hear from the very air around him. The Reverend noted that when Silas spoke, the air itself seemed to grow heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something indefinably ancient. It was the first hint of the deeper, chilling twist. Silas Ashwick didn't build a conventional homestead. He began what he termed excavations deep into the heart of the ridge itself, seemingly following some unseen blueprint. Neighbors, curious but wary, reported hearing rhythmic, deep thrumming from beneath the earth day and night, even when no one was visibly working. Sometimes these thrums would be answered by even deeper, more resonant pulses from the earth, as if the mountain itself was breathing in response. The Ashwick compound, known to locals as the Hollow Heart, grew not outward, but downward, a sprawling labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that dwarfed any mining operation in the region. Locals who dared to venture near reported disorienting acoustic phenomena. Whispers spoken outside the Hollow Heart could be heard clearly within its deepest recesses, while shouts from within were swallowed by the earth, leaving only an unsettling, profound silence. The true horror of the Ashwick line, however, manifested not in their construction, but in their interactions with the isolated community of Gloomwood. Silas, and later his children, possessed an uncanny ability to identify a family's deepest vulnerabilities, not just their economic or health struggles, but their private fears, their secret shames, the unspoken anxieties that gnawed at their souls. Then they would offer gifts. When the Miller family's crops failed for a third consecutive season, Silas didn't just provide seed. He offered a unique strain that yielded impossibly large harvests, but left a lingering metallic taste in the food, and caused those who ate it regularly to experience vivid, communal dreams of endless subterranean passages. When young Thomas Hayes fell ill with a wasting sickness that baffled the local doctor, Silas's wife, Elara, appeared with a poultice that cured him in days. But Thomas returned with eyes that saw too much, capable of describing the deepest thoughts of anyone he looked upon. A gift that slowly isolated him from his own family, who became unnerved by his unnerving insights. These weren't just solutions, they were subtle, irreversible transformations. People didn't just feel indebted, they felt changed. This was the Ashwick's most insidious method, the whisper gifts. What appeared as divine providence or neighborly generosity was actually a systematic program of psychological and subtle biological alteration. My research, piecing together fragments from suppressed medical journals and coded entries in old church ledgers, indicates that the Ashwicks were not merely influencing behavior, but subtly rewriting fundamental human nature. The cures for ailments often left behind enhanced sensory perceptions, hearing impossible frequencies, seeing patterns in shadows, tasting the emotional states of others. The agricultural boons caused subtle genetic drift in families, leading to children born with unusual bone density or pupils that dilated independently. It was slow, imperceptible to the victims themselves, who attributed their odd new faculties to the Lord's blessings or the mountain magic of the Ashwicks. But the cost was always a gradual erosion of individual will and a growing, compulsive alignment with the Ashwick family's unspoken agenda. The children of Silas and Alara Ashwick were not merely offspring. They were extensions of this evolving program. Elias, the eldest, possessed what locals called the sight beyond. Witnesses reported that during conversations, Elias' eyes would cloud over, becoming milky white, and he would begin to describe events happening miles away, sometimes days in the future, with terrifying accuracy. He once calmly narrated a train derailment occurring hundreds of miles distant, even detailing the contents of a specific passenger's satchel, before the telegraph had even brought word of the disaster. Serafina, the middle child, wielded the mending touch. She could heal wounds, mend broken bones, and even soothe the minds of the afflicted with a simple touch. But those she healed developed a profound, almost pathological dependency on her, experiencing crippling anxiety and physical deterioration if separated from her presence for too long. Their very vitality seemed to be linked to her proximity, as if she had absorbed a portion of their life force during her healing. Mordecai, the youngest, developed the echo speak. He could, quite literally, echo the deepest thoughts and fears of an individual back to them, perfectly mimicking their voice and intonation, but with a chilling, hollow resonance that seemed to vibrate from beneath the earth. He used this not to torment, but to guide, subtly inserting suggestions and rationalizations into their internal monologue, until the victim genuinely believed these thoughts were their own. These children, unnervingly mature and intelligent from birth, became specialized agents of the Ashwick's control system. They weren't just manipulative, they embodied the gradual transformation they were inflicting on Gloomwood. Their movements were often synchronized, their speech patterns identical when addressing outsiders, creating the chilling impression of a single, multi-bodied entity rather than distinct individuals. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a pioneering psychologist from Transylvania University, who briefly studied the Ashwicks in 1898 before her research was suppressed, noted that the children exhibited no individual personalities in the conventional sense. Their emotional responses seemed rehearsed, their memories perfectly aligned, as if they shared a single, evolving consciousness. Her private notes, smuggled out before her disappearance, described them as living instruments, refined to a terrifying precision. The heart of the Ashwicks' control lay in what they called the Deep Echoes gatherings. These weren't church services or community meetings. Held monthly within the peculiar acoustic chambers of the Hollow Heart, these gatherings were structured rituals designed to break down individual resistance and foster a collective, shared consciousness. Participants were encouraged, through the subtle hypnotic chanting led by Alara Ashwick, to share their deepest fears, their private conflicts, their hidden shames. The curved, resonant walls of the chamber seemed to amplify and distort sound, making whispered confessions audible while normal conversation became a muffled murmur, creating an environment ripe for psychological conditioning. My findings suggest that during these sessions, individuals entered trance-like states, becoming highly susceptible to suggestion. They emerged feeling purged, connected, and utterly devoted to the Ashwick family, often with patchy memories of what they had disclosed. The Ashwicks, armed with this intimate knowledge, would then approach families days later with solutions to problems that had not yet become public, reinforcing their reputation as omniscient benefactors. A farmer secretly struggling with his marriage might find Elias at his door, offering sage advice on communication. A mother fearing her son's hidden aggression would find Serafina waiting with herbal remedies and soothing words that left the boy calm, but unnervingly docile. This prescient helpfulness cemented the belief that the Ashwicks possessed genuine, supernatural insight, a reputation they cultivated without ever explicitly claiming it. The psychological architecture of their control reached its peak in the annual harvest festivals, which replaced traditional harvest celebrations. During these events, held in a circular clearing surrounded by ancient, petrified oak trees that seemed to pulse with faint, internal light, Families publicly acknowledged their debts to the Ashwicks, offering not just symbolic gifts, but often their most cherished possessions or future rights. Children were often offered to serve in the Ashwick household, a privilege that was never refused. These children, living within the Hollowheart, were subjected to an even more intensive regimen of thought synchronization. They were fed identical meals, wore identical clothing, and were never allowed to develop individual preferences. They spent hours each day reciting identical phrases, practicing synchronized movements, until their speech patterns, mannerisms, and even their breathing became perfectly unified. By adulthood, these borrowed children, as I've termed them, were indistinguishable from the original Ashwick offspring in their unnerving unity of mind and purpose. Returning to the community as unthinking agents of the Ashwick will, their memories of their original families fading into artificial constructs. Any attempt at outside intervention proved futile and often horrifying. In 1892, a federal marshal, Thomas Sterling, known for his relentless pursuit of justice, arrived in Gloomwood Hollow investigating reports of missing census data and unexplained land acquisitions. Sterling was a methodical man, a decorated veteran, and utterly confident in his ability to unravel any mystery. He began by questioning locals, but found their responses uniform, unnaturally positive towards the Ashwicks, and devoid of any genuine emotion. When he attempted to approach the Hollowheart, he was met not with violence, but with a chilling display of the Ashwicks' power. Mordecai Ashwick, then a young man, intercepted him on the path. Mordecai didn't speak, but instead, the marshal later recounted in a barely coherent, undated letter found hidden in his boot. Sterling heard his own deepest, most private doubts echoing in his mind, his deceased mother's voice whispering condemnations of his pride and ambition, his estranged wife's accusations of neglect, all perfectly reproduced by a presence that was clearly not his own. The internal monologue was so invasive, so relentless, that Sterling collapsed, screaming. He returned to the nearest town, Prestonburg, a shadow of his former self. His hair had turned white overnight. His eyes, once sharp and determined, were wide and unfocused, darting as if constantly trying to escape an unseen presence. Dr. Bartholomew Finch, the town physician, documented Sterling's rapid deterioration. The marshal would often sit for hours, muttering to himself, then suddenly clutch his head and whimper about the echoes, they know what you're thinking before you do. He was found dead 3 weeks later, not from any physical ailment, but simply from a cessation of vital functions, as if his mind, relentlessly invaded, had simply ceased to command his body. His last lucid words, scrawled on a scrap of paper, were, "They showed me the inside of my own skull, and it was hollow." This incident, though officially dismissed as a mental breakdown, cemented the Ashwicks' untouchable reputation. No law enforcement dared approach Gloomwood Hollow again. By 1910, the Ashwicks had achieved something unprecedented. The complete, voluntary subjugation of an entire community, a living experiment in controlled human evolution. Families competed for the privilege of serving the Ashwicks, viewing their growing dependency not as enslavement, but as a higher form of communal harmony. Children were sent to the Hollowheart not as an obligation, but as an honor. Adults sought the Ashwicks' guidance for every major life decision, from marriage and property purchases to the naming of their children. The Hollowheart itself had grown, its subtle architectural modifications expanding its reach. From a distinctive tower that rose from the central structure, Elias, with his sight beyond, could literally oversee every home in Gloomwood, documenting daily routines, relationship dynamics, and behavioral patterns, feeding this intelligence into the collective Ashwick consciousness. What made their control so insidious was its voluntary nature. Community members genuinely believed their dependence on the family was beneficial, even necessary for their survival and prosperity. They had been conditioned to view independent thought as dangerous, self-serving, and disruptive to the collective harmony. While submission to Ashwick wisdom was hailed as the highest virtue, the Ashwick family's influence wasn't just local. It subtly extended its tendrils beyond Gloomwood. My research uncovered cryptic correspondence between Silas Ashwick and obscure academic societies in Europe, discussions about collective consciousness, biological symbiosis, and temporal resonance. It suggested that the Ashwicks weren't just isolated anomalies. They might have been part of a wider, ancient network, perhaps even the original architects of similar, unrecorded experiments across the globe. The economic prosperity of Gloomwood during periods of widespread depression also defied explanation. While surrounding counties struggled, Gloomwood always had enough, seemingly generating wealth from nothing. There were no visible industries, no lucrative mines, no vast farmlands. Yet the Ashwicks always had gold, always had resources, suggesting a mastery over something far beyond conventional economics. Perhaps even the ability to subtly influence the very flow of matter and energy within their domain. The climax of the Ashwick line's legacy occurred in 1934. It wasn't a violent end or a sudden collapse. It was, as their final journal entry described it, the culmination. On the morning of October 31st, every member of the extended Ashwick clan, including the hundreds of borrowed children and their descendants, simply vanished from Gloomwood Hollow. Their homes were left undisturbed, meals still warm on tables, personal belongings scattered as if they had simply stepped away for a moment. But there was no trace. The only clue found was in the Hollowheart itself, the sprawling underground complex. Every mirror in every chamber was found deliberately shattered. Every photograph of family members, even the oldest ones, had the faces meticulously scratched out. And then there were the diaries. 17 identical leather-bound journals, discovered in a hidden root cellar, each written in a different hand, yet containing the exact same entries, day after day, spanning 37 years. The final entry, dated October 30th, 1934, was chillingly succinct. The experiment concludes, individual identity has been successfully eliminated. We return to the source. The seed is planted. The new form awaits. Federal investigators, alerted by the sudden, inexplicable abandonment of an entire community, classified the incident as a mass migration due to economic hardship. But their private notes, which I found buried deep in the National Archives, tell a different story. They found evidence of recent habitation, warm food, still burning embers, but no people. Bloodstains covered the floors of several buildings, not from violence, but from what appeared to be some kind of ritual bleeding, forming complex geometric patterns. Most unsettling was the discovery of a mass grave, containing remains that carbon dating revealed to be centuries old, despite being buried in clothing from the 1930s. It suggested that the Ashwicks had been recycling their victims, or that the very concept of time was distorted within Gloomwood today. Gloomwood Hollow officially appears as unbroken forest on modern GPS systems. Satellite imagery shows nothing but dense tree cover where the settlement supposedly existed. County records contain detailed information about the Ashwick family's activities, but list them as occurring in a location that current geography cannot accommodate. The few elderly residents of surrounding areas who claim knowledge of Gloomwood provide contradictory accounts. Some describe it as a prosperous community that mysteriously vanished overnight. Others insist it was always a cursed place that drove people mad with isolation and fear. A handful of individuals claiming to be descendants of Gloomwood families occasionally surface in regional genealogical databases, but attempts to interview them inevitably result in their disappearance before meetings can be arranged. But what remains, Arthur Vance, is far more chilling than their disappearance. Gloomwood Hollow is not empty. The forest there is unnaturally quiet, devoid of birdsong, the wind a mere whisper that never rustles the leaves. And the mountain itself, it feels alive, not with natural life, but with a deep, persistent hum that resonates in your bones if you stand there long enough. Researchers who have managed to gain access to the restricted zones around the former Hollowheart report electromagnetic anomalies that defy explanation. Energy pulses that follow rhythmic patterns, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat emanating from deep within the earth. Geological surveys detect structural changes in the underground cave systems that occur according to patterns no natural process could explain, as if the massive underground complex continues to expand, reshaping itself according to some unseen alien blueprint. And the borrowed children, the descendants of Gloomwood Hollow. They are out there, I found them, not all of them, but enough. They live seemingly normal lives, scattered across Appalachia and beyond, but they carry the Ashwick legacy within their very genetic code. They display an unusual precognitive empathy, an ability to intuitively understand the emotional and psychological states of others and subtly guide their decisions, always towards a vague, collective purpose. They possess uncanny healing abilities, but those they heal also develop that same profound, almost pathological dependency that Serafina's victims displayed. And most chillingly, they display a suppressed, almost instinctual compulsion to return to Gloomwood Hollow, especially when the conditions are right. On certain nights, when atmospheric pressure aligns in a specific way, residents in surrounding areas report hearing faint, rhythmic thrumming from beneath the earth, the same sounds that echoed from the Hollowheart a century ago, as if the excavations continue in chambers that exist outside the boundaries of our mapped world. The Ashwick line wasn't just a family that terrorized. They were a catalyst. Their century-long experiment was not about control for power's sake, but about systematically altering human consciousness and capability, cultivating a new form of human. They understood something profound about the psychology of isolated communities and the malleability of the human spirit. They taught that people would surrender their freedom gradually in exchange for the illusion of security, and that the most effective prison is one where the inmates believe they are free. But they went beyond psychological conditioning. They initiated a biological and metaphysical transformation, slowly, imperceptibly, preparing humanity for a purpose we cannot yet comprehend. Their legacy is a chilling warning. In the deepest hollows of Appalachia, forces operate that could reshape the very future of human existence. And the scariest part, the experiment never truly ended. It merely entered a new phase, one where the subjects themselves, subtly altered and willingly compliant, continue the work of their unseen architects, unaware that they are not just free, but actively participating in their own gradual, beautiful, terrifying transformation. The Ashwick line didn't just disappear, they ascended. They became the very mountains, the very whispers on the wind, the very thoughts in our minds. And they are still waiting, still cultivating, still changing what it means to be human. What part of the Ashwick line's chilling legacy do you find most unsettling? Let me know in the comments below, and follow for more stories that redefine fear.